Hello, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon session. And I hope you're all energized by our previous speaker, and if not, by a good dose of caffeine and chocolates of the goodies out there. So my name is Mia de Kuiper. I'm a Harvard GSAS PhD in economics, but I spent much of my career in the field of technology that we've been discussing so much about today. And I'm very honored to be also a part of the Graduate School Alumni Association Council. I am here today, and I'm very happy to introduce Professor Grzegorz Ekiert. He's one of our own, a PhD, a Harvard PhD in history. And the title of his presentation is Can Liberal Democracy Survive? The Second Transformation. And, as I don't need to tell you the way that the world has been moving, the whole subject of can liberal democracy survive, period, is not just contemporary, it's actually a hot subject. So I'm really very interested in hearing what Professor Ekiert has to tell us. So Professor Ekiert is the Laurence Tisch Professor of Government, and he is also senior scholar at Harvard Academy for International and Area Studies. For many years, he's been the director of the Minda de Gunzburg Center for European Studies and the chair of Harvard Social Studies program. And he's the newly appointed director of the Davies Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies. So he's very capable of getting himself into all sorts of contemporary and interesting subjects. His area of specialty is, therefore, comparative politics, and his research focuses on the politics of Eastern Europe, democracy, and civil society. He's the author and editor of several influential books, including Ruling by Other Means, Capitalism and Democracy in Central and Eastern Europe, and Rebellious Civil Society. So please join me in welcoming Grzegorz Ekiert for his presentation, Can Liberal Democracy Survive? The Second Great Transformation.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I have my mic here. Okay, so it is really a great pleasure to take part in this event. We all have amazing memories of our years in the graduate school. For me, it was very unusual because I got to the PhD program in sociology straight from communist Poland, which at that time was under martial law. So when I arrived to Cambridge, I loved everything. It was just unbelievable experience. And these were probably, the most rewarding, the happiest years of my life. And I was privileged to stay at Harvard after the graduate school. So I've been hanging around for many, many years, and it was a great privilege to have this experience. Now I'm very distressed now by the way the university is treated by Trump administration. We suffer, tremendous cuts in all the grants and subsidies we've been getting from the university, from the federal government. At the Center for Russian Studies, at the Davies Center, we lost approximately $800,000 a year, and these were the funds to support our MA graduate students. And I think, this kind of experience is probably everywhere at this university. And I think this is one of the biggest mistakes American government can make to undercut the greatest system of higher education in the world. And I think others will probably take advantage of this very soon. I feel that you all have strange feelings about what's going on in the world. And I think that we sort of less and less understand where things go and why things happened the way they happened. So I would like to talk about this today and put this in a slightly long historical perspective, because what is going on in the world today is not something new. It's something which the West, first of all, but the entire global system has experienced for quite some time. Now, I'm going to talk about three different things. And so first, I will go back to the first great transformation. You are all very familiar with this. This is the Industrial Revolution, which started in the mid of the 18th century, and in the course of the 19th century really changed the world and Western Europe and the US in the most profound ways. Millions of people moved from countryside to the cities. New industries emerge. All the things we use today, cars and other things, electricity, were invented at that time. But at the same time, what happened during the Great Transformation was that all the classic institutions, traditional norms, political systems, and so on were undermined and collapsed. And there was a lot of commotion, a lot of disruption, and that disruption had very profound effects on what happened at the beginning of the 20th century. And I will say something more about this in a second. Now, the second issue I am going to focus on would be to think about what kind of epoch we are living through now. How do we call it? What the current thinkers are telling us about the nature of societies and developments we are experiencing right now. And finally, I'm going to outline a few ideas about how we can defend liberal democracy in those very difficult moments. So that's the plan for now. I think I'm making a mistake we always tell our graduate students not to make. I have too many slides, and I have those slides overloaded with things. But I just couldn't resist trying to sort of show you more things. So let's start with the quotation. Right, and if you read this carefully, right, so the world, future, more unpredictable. Never have we depended so much on political forces we cannot trust, who do not follow the rules of the self-interest and common sense. Sounds very familiar, right? Now, this was written by Hannah Arendt, the great German Jewish American philosopher, in the introduction to her book about the origins of totalitarianism in 1950s. Now, the question is why Hannah Arendt was wrong. Because she definitely was wrong, because what followed after the Second World War was, the most successful period, the most successful 40, 50 years in the history of Western democracies. So first of all, we had a tremendous cast of leaders. People with vision, people with integrity, people with responsibility. These are the founders of the European Union, probably the most amazing political and economic experiment ever attempted in the history of the world. And for the first time, the experiment which benefits everyone. No one is exploiting anyone. Everyone is cooperating with everyone except for Viktor Orban, who just lost the election in Hungary. But this project is amazing. So we had great politicians during the time. And then the Union expanded from 6 countries in the 1950s through another set of enlargements. First, the Southern Europe joined the European Union and became a bastion of democracy. Then Central European countries joined the European Union, and their economic situation and their political systems greatly improved through those enlargement. And then, of course, we had this period of tremendous economic growth. So as you see here, US and Europe were the champions of economic developments, the highest living standards in the world, the highest economic growth in the world. You know, you travel a lot to Europe, you see how Europe looks like. This is the place everyone would like to live. So why Hannah Arendt was wrong, not predicting that this is going to be this amazing period of development in the region? I think the problem was that she did not read Karl Polanyi. Polanyi was Austrian Jewish Hungarian thinker who wrote the famous book about the Great Transformation. In this book, he outlined the story of why this unbelievable disruption which happened in the 19th century, which affected everything, was suddenly brought into control. And that big disruption was a subject of, a reflection for the greatest minds of the 19th century. People like Marx, like Durkheim, Weber, Tönnies, were trying to figure out what's going on with societies during the transformation. And they were pointing out, Marx was talking about emerging capitalist formation with new class struggle. Durkheim was talking about societies which move from mechanical solidarity to organic solidarity. Tönnies was talking about the move from Gemeinschaft to Gesellschaft. So there was a huge, tremendous social change on the top of the political change, the empires which emerged during that period, and so on. So Karl Polanyi pointed to this great period of disruption and called this a situation in which economy was disembedded from social relations and social institutions. He said, when you think about, thousands of years of human development, economic relations were always governed by norms, by institutions, by ways in which societies live. And then only in this period, suddenly, the economic forces became free. It was not society which governed the economic activities and economic relations, but these were economic relations which started to govern all other social activities. And this generated tremendous social dislocation, authoritarian backlash, collapse of democracies. And Eric Hobsbawm, the great British historian, pointed out that what we see in the beginning of the 20th century, the most tragic developments in the long time, to a large extent, has to be related to those disruptions which happened in the 19th century. So what happened in the first half of the 20th century? We had 2 world wars, collapse of the 4 empires, bunch of revolutions, Russian, Chinese, and others. Fascism came to power. We have collapse of democracy in 22 countries. We have great economic depression, and we have anti-colonial movements all over the world. The scale of those, events can be shown only in the number of people who were killed. 170 million people died during this period in those wars, revolutions, and so on. So here is the story, right? First, we have this long period of disruption, technology, economy, everything. Then we have this period of incredible violence and convulsions when societies were trying to make sense of what happened during the war. And then we have this period of calm after the end of the Second World War. So Polanyi was making the argument, really, that what happened during that period after the Second World War was de-embedding the economy into a social and political relations. And this de-embedding of the economy was connected to development of the welfare state in Western Europe and in the US. So, when we look at the economic data, we clearly see here, this is the size of the state, the spending by the state. You see those two jumps. This is the First World War, the Second World War, and then things go up, right? So the states are spending more and more on a variety of things, mostly trying to stimulate the investment, trying to build the safety nets, trying to protect people in a variety of ways, trying to regulate the ways in which the economy works. The same story happens when we look at the social spending. This is exactly, the way in which economy was embedded again in the network of social relations. The economy was controlled, the economy was regulated. Now, let's think for a moment, what is the kind of society, what is the period we are living in, right? Can we call this the next great transformation? And what's the sense of what's going on around us? And I'm going to point to 6 arguments, 6 contemporary thinkers who are going to tell us how the new societies we live in look like. So the first one is Zygmunt Bauman. He's the Polish-British sociologist who coined the term liquid modernity. And he counterposed this term into the idea of solid modernity. What he's telling us is that by and large, we moved from a situation in which we have stable things, families, institutions, jobs, universities. These were things which created a lot of stability. These were things which did not change. When you got a job in the Ford company, you worked for 30 years before you retired. And you were sure that you were getting the retirement from the company as well. The same happened to university professors and so on. Now he says this completely changed. Now we are living in liquid modernity, which everything is uncertain, everything is unstable, everything is inflexible, everything is in constant flux. Now, perhaps you and some of you who are close to my age don't feel that because we still have the old solid jobs, but the young people are feeling that in a very acute way, right? When they are struggling, trying to find jobs and so on. And this is not a mystery why, young people in Europe vote for fascist and right-wing political parties, because that's exactly that kind of pressure of this liquid modernity and the way this liquid modernity affects their lives. Now, the second idea comes from the German sociologist who wrote a book about social acceleration. And he talks about technological acceleration, social acceleration, acceleration of the pace of life. And he says, we are all under chronic time pressure. We never have enough time to do anything. We are multitasking, we are doing hundreds of things at the same time, and we are always behind, right? So the world is speeding up. The things which are demanded from us, the things which we need to do, suddenly multiplying in this incredible way. Someone did research on how fast people walk in New York, and this research has been done for many, many years. So today, people are walking 3 times faster than they walked 30 years ago, right? So, this is one example, but this affects, the speed of everything, affects how we live, what we can do, and how we feel. Now, the third idea comes from another German sociologist, Ulrich Beck. He talks about risk society. Right? These new developments generate a lot of risks of various kinds. And those risks are out of control. That we are asked as individuals to take care of different things. You are asked to invest your pension money. You ask to buy your health insurance. You ask to do many different things which in the past someone else did for you, right? So you are asked to manage your risks. And many of those risks cannot be managed in individual way. Pollution, other things. These are risks which kind of are out of control. And again, he makes a point, this kind of situations undermines the trust in authorities, undermines the trust in science, in experts, because, we don't know who is right. People are telling us different things. Scientists change view over and over again and so on. So how should we really manage all those risks if we don't have real understanding what is true and what is not? Now, another sociologist, this is a British sociologist, Gay Standing, is telling us the story that because of those things I already described, we are approaching a new type of society in which a huge class of people lives outside the system. He called them the precariat. So these are people who have insecurity, don't have permanent jobs, have weak rights and limited access to social protection, face chronic insecurity in their work, in their life, gig work, short contracts, moving from place to place just to survive. And it affects not only poor people. This is not about poor people. When you think about academics, young academics in Europe, getting a position at the university is almost impossible today. What they do, they move from 2-3-year grant positions from one place to another. 2 years in Stockholm, 2 years in Berlin, 2 years in London, and so on, without ever being able to get stable jobs, stable, life insurance, stable benefits of various kinds, and so on. So we are having a group of people who really lives outside of the system of the old stable society. Ralph Dahrendorf was the great British German sociologist who at a certain point had a thought that when we look at the old societies, look at feudal period. The feudal lords needed the peasants to work. Then you look at the industrial period, the bourgeoisie needed workers to work. And now we are in the situation in which no one needs those people who are the precariat, right? We just spend money to give them something so they don't, so they can survive. But the ruling classes, the economic, wealth really does not need those people anymore. So it is a big change. Now, here is something you are familiar with. This is a group of scholars who talk about new technological revolution, and few familiar things. There is no relationship now between productivity and labor. Economic growth and creation of wealth has nothing to do with jobs and incomes. We have new inequalities emerging in just absolutely incredible way. And this leads to the collapse of various traditional institutions. Now think about the university. I'm terrified when I have to run the exam because I don't know what I can do now. Can I ask people to write the paper? Yeah, AI is going to write those papers. Right? Can I ask them to, sit in class and write something, with all the phones and computers, they can do anything, right? So how are we supposed to examine our students? I come from, the old-fashioned Polish universities where all the exams were oral. I had, like 50 oral exams in my student life. Can we do it now? The scale of what we do makes this very impractical, right? So that's example, right? How the new technologies are undermining the things we've been doing for many, many years, not to mention social media, all the other disruptions. When you think about periods of we had this idea that, having more access to information and something is such a great thing. All the big technological changes in the way information is produced and distributed ended up with very tragic and very long conflict situations. Invention of print was not the greatest gift because it was followed by the 100 years of religious wars in Europe, right? So, a lot of people now criticize the social media for this. One more person whom I really like very much. He's a Korean sociologist, philosopher who lives and works in Germany. And he, in the series of short essays, he put together sort of diagnosis of the state of current societies. So he talks about burnout society. We are asked to improve ourselves constantly. This is a project of endless improvement. We have to be productive, we have to stay healthy, we have to take care of various things. And he says this leads to a stress, this leads to exhaustion, widespread psychological suffering. And he also talks about other things, that things disappear. Disappearance of rituals. We don't celebrate holidays anymore. Right? This is a pain in the neck for us. We rather do something else. And our children would do rather something else as well. There is, in his account, there is a death of narrative. We don't tell the stories anyone to one another, right? We sort of, everything becomes fragmented, TikTok stories of various kinds and so on. And then we deal with non-things, right? He says, how to actually, professors in the old good times had books. These were things. Now we don't. Libraries. Do we need libraries anymore? These are places full of things. But we use non-things, right? AI and electronic things. People collected things in the past. Music records and other things, right? These were things. We are living now, I have Apple Music on my computer. I don't need things, right? I deal with non-things. Okay, so that's how contemporary societies look like. And of course, what we see around the world is the reflection of it, right? So, this is very familiar to you. We have global democratic recession. These are data from Freedom House, which every year look at the state of political institutions, countries around the world. And for the last 20 years, in more countries, the situation deteriorated in terms of, politics and institutions and elections, and then it went up, right? So the green one is improvement, the red one is, situation in which you have less, you have situation in which, those political systems are getting worse. You look at the specific countries, this is a story of backsliding. Right? You all heard about economic backsliding. You measure where countries were in 2005, and when you look at 2022, you see that almost every single country lost ground. And the biggest backslider today is the United States. Right? So what took people like Viktor Orban 10 years, Trump was able to accomplish in a, matter of months. Right? So So here is the backsliding. But the second thing which is frightening is that the authoritarian countries are becoming more authoritarian. Now, we had this idea, 30 years ago that we will deal with new sort of authoritarian regimes, which will be softer, nicer, more pleasant, will allow some civil society, will allow some political opposition. This is not true anymore. We are having hard, old-fashioned dictatorships emerging in many places. Think about Russia, think about China. And then, this is again Freedom House showing a group of countries over the last several years, how their scores hit the ground, right? You cannot go lower than this, right? So we have the rise of hardcore authoritarian politics in the world. And here is the vote for populist parties. It increased 3 times since the mid of the 1990s. These are people voting for extreme political parties. And what is very interesting is that they are voting mostly for right-wing extremist parties. Global order. We know this very well now, right? There is return of wars. There are over 130 military conflicts around the world. And we have the major war in Europe, the first one since 1941. And as you see from the data, there is almost 1.5 million Russian soldiers who already died in this war. And now we have not one, but many wars in the Middle East. We have the war of US and Israel against Iran. We have war of Israel against Lebanon. We have war of Iran against the Gulf countries. We have war of Houthis against everyone else. I mean, this is a amazing, amazingly complicated situation. So we have democratic backsliding. We have autocratization, emergence of dictatorships, and we have emergence of wars. Now, what is to be done about this? And a lot of people around the world are thinking hard. So first of all, we need to follow Polanyi. We need to embed the new economy into a social and political relations. We need to, as Polanyi would say, subordinate the economic developments to social needs, social norms, and social values. Societies have to take control again of the economy through taxation, regulation, welfare reforms, to avoid marginalization, to avoid precariat. So embedding economy, controlling economy is the task of the day. And everyone realizing that this, except for the politicians. Okay, so, Sam Altman just published, AI published a paper, manifesto a week ago, in which he says, here are the principles which we have to follow. We have to share the prosperity as broadly as possible. We have to mitigate the risks, and we have to democratize access to agency. How do we do that? We need to have a new industrial politics. Look, this is the guy, one of the richest people in the world, which controls one of the most important companies in the world. And he begs the government for regulations. This is pretty unbelievable situations. So embedding the new disruptive economy into society is the first task of the day. Now, the second task of the day is that we need to defend liberal democracy. For a long time, we were just taking it for granted. And then we are surprised that, someone is using this and taking power and starting repressing things, starting shutting down newspapers and, intimidating media and so on and so on. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but there are very specific different ways how you can defend liberal democracy depending on whether the illiberal parties are in power or illiberal parties are in opposition and what kind of illiberal parties they are, whether these are fascist, communist, anti-systemic parties, or these are just populist parties. And there are different ways in which you can think about this. And finally, we need to reform our liberal democratic institutions. We need to make those institutions a porcupine, that even if non-liberals take power, they are not able to destroy those institutions. Now, there are different ways of reforming democracy. So there are people who say, we need more democracy. We need more direct democracy. We need citizens to be involved in the decision-making process, deliberative democracies. You all heard about this. The other group is arguing that we need less democracy, right? We should not give the politicians the possibility to manipulate the institutions. We need independent central banks. We need independent agencies of various kinds. We need organizations which politicians cannot use for their own purpose. And there is economic rationale for that, of course. All the research in the world shows that countries which have independent central banks have less inflation and better economic growth. So ask Trump, why is he trying to destroy the American central bank? Right? That's exactly the kind of things the authoritarians do. But those kind of direct democracy ideas have a lot of problems, and we can talk about this, what kind of problems they have. So what I really would like to suggest, that we need a multi-pronged strategy of reforming the liberal democracies. So first of all, we need to make local democracies more democratic. On the local level, people should decide about how they tax, what they want to do with money, how they want to support different things, what kind of things they want to support. This is the scale on which the decision-making, the participatory budgets make a lot of sense. But we need less democracy on the state level. We don't want to let politicians to dominate, politicize all the institutions. We need non-majoritarian and counter-majoritarian institutions which will check the power of majorities in parliaments. So here is another list of things, how this can be done through constitutional changes, through some decentralization efforts, and for depoliticization. And I would like to end with this, that we still have time to do that. This is a poster from the competition in Poland several years ago. And this poster won the first prize on that competition. It's called Loading. Now, the Polish authorities at that time, the right-wing party was in power, canceled the entire competition not to give the prize to the artist who came up with the poster. But I think it is still what should concern us. This is still loading. And I think that is our task as citizens to really do anything we can prevent this one for fully loading. Thank you so much. So we have a few minutes, please.
I've dealt a lot with the federal and the local government. The local government works amazingly well. I have problems. They're interested. They generally live near where the problem is and they deal with it. The federal government, it's impossible. It's like a steamship moving. So, and the other thing is that basically I know professors, a brilliant one who won the Lasker Award, which is often a prelude to Nobel Prize in biology, and the university cut his funding. And what do you have to say? He needs a new billionaire. And the billionaires now are more aligned with anti-democracy and authoritarian. How does that reconcile with what you said?
I mean, the first thing you said is absolutely right, and that's the idea that we should give more democracy to people at the local level. No, I did not. Maybe I misspoke. So the idea would be to restrict democracy at the national level, to give more democracy at the local level, right? Now, there is this idea that there's too many regulations in places like the U.S., right? So people from the MAGA movements are rallying against regulations and so on. It's paradox that there is a lot of regulations on the local level, which are mostly produced by the people on the local level. So, I live in the suburb of Boston, where you cannot do almost anything. You cannot park the car on the street. You cannot run the business from your home. You cannot change the color of your house. You cannot do 100 other things. You cannot buy an alcohol because there is only one liquor store, and so on and so on. You can multiply. There are no liquor license for restaurants, so there are very few restaurants and so on. Right? So, the local level has problems and they need to be addressed, but on the local level. Right? Now, what do you do with the billionaires? I think, you have now division between those 5 people who run the American economy today. Right? Some are supporting Trump and others are telling us, like Sam Altman, that we need to do something about this, right? That we have to regulate, that we have to develop the institutions which are going to be broad and, accommodate various interests in society. We need to have the, survival wage for everyone in society, because, this is generated by the economic institutions which no longer are linked to our jobs and our income and so on. But the point really is that we are in the mid of the 19th century today. We are living through fundamental change. I mean, this university is the only feudal institution standing today. And we thought that, we will do what we do for another, at least 20 years, 30 years. And today we know that we cannot do this anymore, right? There is no lectures anymore. There is no exams anymore. There are things going on which we don't understand and don't know how to control and so on and so on. So this is going to undermine everything. Now the question is, do we have the capacity and imagination today to confront those challenges, right? And those challenges are being not confronted by the politicians. The problems of the U.S. Is that the American political class do not want to regulate the artificial intelligence. And American political class is telling European political class that they shouldn't do it because there are going to be the economic sanctions. And Europeans have more healthier way of thinking about this because of the experience of the welfare state after the Second World War. They know that they have to regulate this new emerging economy to embed it again in social norms, social values, and social institutions.
Yeah, thank you. Very good talk. I'm just wondering about the actions of our central government where they're diminishing research grants, they're taking action against the things that we have tried to do to prevent pollution and climate change, et cetera, et cetera. How does this hurt our standing in the world and our competitiveness compared to other countries that are going full bore to compete?
Yeah. Well, universities in this country were, the crown jewel of economic development. Think where all the important things were invented in the US. Silicon Valley, next to Stanford, we are the hub of the biochem revolution, and so on. So, these universities are the engines of innovations and the engines of economic growth. Those universities were able to bring the brightest of the brightest from all around the world. And many of those left here, work for this country, right? So trying to destroy that is just, incredibly stupid thing to do. Now others are taking advantage of it. So when you look at the citations, innovations, and other things, they are moving to Europe because Europe by law, European Union by law, spends specific percentage of GDP on education and innovations. If you are in Europe today and you work at the university, you can get almost any money you want. If you have idea, they will fund it. And I've seen, grant proposals for which I wouldn't give a penny. But they are being funded in millions and millions of euros. So, the center of academic activities is moving away from the US. And then the China story. China is moving full speed to electrify everything. They have the best innovations in batteries, in electric cars, everything. And we are moving back. I remember very vividly, I don't remember, but this always was something which kind of, blowed my mind. So Nikita Khrushchev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union in the 1950s, had this famous speech at the United Nations in which he took his shoe off and was banging the shoe on the pulpit saying, "We will bury you. We will have the biggest, the best, the most desired economy in the world in 30 years, and you will be left behind." And indeed, in 30 years, Soviet Union had most polluted economy in the world, the highest use of coal and energy in the world, the highest use of steel in the world. They created the perfect 19th century economy. And at that time, US were moving to computers, software, everything. So, I think that current administration has exactly the Khrushchev problem. They want to build a perfect first half of the 20th century economy. Oil, cars, Okay, so that's the story. Yes, I agree, absolutely. This is what is going on, and hopefully this is not going to last long, because otherwise we are in big trouble.
Thank you. I'm still struggling with how to put your recommendations into practice, but one small point about Europe advancing. I lived in France for 4 years. I loved it. This was during the Esprit project, where European money was being put into all sorts of projects. As you say, if you could type a proposal, it would get funded more or less. And the goal was European integration. So Esprit project said, you'll get money if you have partners in at least 4 countries or something like this. In the meantime, the US was building the internet with military funding and didn't have an Esprit program. And the US did much, much better with research, integration, and all that. The most brilliant researchers come from Europe, including some of the top people who are working on AI today, are French and so on. But the development isn't happening in Europe. So I'm not sure I see your point about how Europe is going to advance. I can see how the US is going to decline, and I can see how the concentration of wealth is creating huge social problems, partly because of the actual political power it gives them, but partly also of the perception of where we are. So I'm afraid I don't see the way out for either Europe or the US right now, which makes me very sad.
Mm-hmm. Well, right. It's very difficult not to agree with you, right? And I think both the U.S. and Europe need, a great effort to start moving in the right direction. I think the European project, has tremendous potential. This is the biggest market in the world. This is the wealthiest market in the world, right? So I think the problems are still that the integration process is not finished. They're moving step by step. The fact that veto now is less likely than it was a week ago is a step in the right direction. They need to build their own technical, computer industries, which they didn't do. They need to move to electrification the way, China moved in a very aggressive way. This is the most wonderful political and economic project in the world, and I think so. We should try to cheer on the sidelines as much as possible that they are successful in moving along. But it's very difficult to run this kind of project, right? With so many countries, with so many interests, there is always one, unpleasant character who suddenly decides to veto something and prevent something from happening. But where Europe has an advantage, and this is very often, treated as, this is the horrible thing they do. It has advantage in regulations. Europe is the place where they came up with many ideas of how to regulate different things, to prevent risks on the one hand, to make sure that every single project in the 500 million market with 28 countries have exactly the same standards. If you buy anything in Europe, you know that this is a safe thing you may have. The dilemma for Europe is how to support innovations while keep that sort of urge to regulate and embed the new economy into society relatively intact. For US, the story is different, right? We have innovations. We have, those biggest IT companies and AI companies in the world. The question is, how should we regulate those companies for the benefit of the entire society? And for China, the trade-off and story is, can you really build a innovative economy in the dictatorial context? Right, so no one has advantage above anyone at this point in everything, in sort of general way. There are three ways of doing things: it's American, European, and Chinese. And the question to watch over the next couple of decades would be which of those ways of doing things is going to be sustainable and the most successful.
Hi. You've detailed lots of problems that we're facing and put them in historical perspective, and you suggested lots of solutions. But I'm wondering, and I think it's frightening. Do we have the kind of organization and planning and cooperation that is necessary to put those kinds of solutions into action, or at least enough of those solutions into action soon enough to matter? There's still time left for democracy, but not so much given the direction that things are going and the speed with which things are going. So could you say something about the degree of organization and cooperation and planning and how we can do that? And are there organizations or peoples or societies that are actively working on that now? Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. No, it's excellent question, right? So everyone is struggling with that questions, and I have friends who are involved in various resistance movements in the U.S., caring about immigrants and other things, and they are coming up with innovations and how to organize resistance and how to organize protests and so on. This is one stream. You have people on the other hand, like Altman, who are trying to sort of, convince the winners that they should share what they won. Again, this in certain ways may become successful. You have great examples of the reversal of the autocratic rule. Think about Poland with the elections 2 years ago, where Poland became sort of again, pro-European democratic country. And think about Hungary a week ago, right, or 10 days ago. This situation looked almost impossible. And they won tremendous victory, the opposition, the liberal pro-European oppositions, because they innovated in many different ways. How to run the electoral campaign. What do they need to do? They don't need to talk to people, at the universities. They have to go to every single bloody village in Hungary and tell them, you are on the short end of everything. You have lousy education, you have lousy healthcare, you have lousy income, and so on. And Magyar was visiting those villages 2-3 times over the last 2 years, right? So, we need to learn from examples like this, what things are effective, how can we change the strategies of the way we conduct politics, how should we think about candidates, and so on. What kind of issues are important? What kind of issues are winnable? I mean, Hungary is a very traditional society. So when you come and say, well, same-sex marriage, all those things are incredibly important, they are scared. But when you tell them, schools are important, healthcare is important, housing is important, they like it. Right, so that was the strategy to avoid, issues which are culturally divisive in very traditional societies. I think this is going to be a problem in the U.S. as well. Has been, right? That the parties are moving off the center and trying to run on the agendas which are sort of more to the direction of extremes, and even given the extent of changes we see in all societies, we are still dealing with relatively traditional societies in many places, except for some, very modernized places in Europe, like Sweden, probably, right? That you could, that society, the preferences and so on are very different. But we are still dealing with societies which are very uncomfortable and scared of various things, which become an issue on the political agendas of political parties.
One problem is that when you think about making local more powerful, is that during the civil rights movement, local was a problem. Yeah. That was the problem, and the solution was the federal government. So, I look at this differently. One is something that was mentioned, which is, because I've lived in or worked in 35 countries. the US still is the most dynamic. I mean, just fundamentally, people are constantly thinking about new ways to do things, new ways to approach things, whatever it is. So, one problem is concentration of power, concentration of wealth. And I think there's a whole other dimension, which is thinking about the stories we tell each other. We talk a lot about billionaires, and they become the models. Not so much, we had Artemis, and for a while people were talking about that. The most diverse group of astronauts we've had anywhere, in a lot of ways. So part of this, I think, is sort of, there's going to be an election soon. And I do think a different party is going to be in power in Congress. So we need to start thinking about how are we going to use that? Are we going to squander it? Or are we going to use it to try and when I worked with companies, we had critical success factors. We would say to a CEO, you pick 3 to 5 things, not more, 3 to 5. And that we need to do the same thing, concentration of power, and start thinking about the stories we tell each other. Because one thing Scott Galloway, I don't know if you know who he is, one thing he said that really struck me, he said he was in England, he lived there for a long time, and they said to him, why is it the U.S. is built so many technologies and it's so innovative and we can't seem to get that off the ground here? And he said, we're the ones that left. We're the ones who left. Americans have more in common with each other that cuts across gender and race and religion and all of those things. But, we don't have the stories right now to talk about that like we didn't in the 17th century. It took 1700s, took a long time to develop.
Right. Okay, thank you so much. I think, okay, so we a little bit sort of have too much good feelings about the history of the U.S. You look back to 19th century and earlier, and it's a pretty horrible country with a lot of crazy populists who are trying to introduce Bible to schools and expel of the Irish and so on and so on. So this country civilized in many different ways through the 20th century and so on. Now, I think our problem in general is that we tend to seek solutions that one size fits all. And I think, we really have to acknowledge that different societies have different problems, different societies have different divisions. In some places this is wealth, in other places this is race, in other places this is ethnicity. It's a lot of situations. And when people were thinking about how to democratize things, right? Now we are thinking how to save democracy. But there was this moment 30 years ago that we were thinking how to democratize. And one of the important things at that moment was to say, okay, look, everyone has problems. We have to identify the problems and then propose the solutions, right? So, in some places, probably more power to the local level is not a good idea, right? But in other places, it is. In some places, having a public media is not a good idea. In other places, it is. In Poland, when the far-right government got to power, you had public media. They took over this in like 1 week. And those, public media became a propaganda machine for the government. The only one single private TV station owned by Disney kept, the variety of views in Poland for 8 years. So, if you would advise the Polish government how to protect the country from, illiberal forces, you say, privatize the media, right? Because then they cannot take it over. Now, here is Hungary. Orban did not create a public media. He asked French oligarchs who made money because of the contract he provided to buy the media. So all the media are owned by the oligarchs. So now what do you do when you are major now? Are you nationalize this? Are you turn this into public, right? So, these are the examples that every single place has, some very specific problems which go to the heart of, democratic value and pluralism and liberalism and so on, right? So we need to, spend more time trying to think about variety of solutions for different things. I see the last question thing. So, okay, please.
Yes. So freedom of speech is one of the most important aspects of liberal democracy. So I wonder, how is Trump responsible that Harvard places typically the worst among universities in censorship, or that during the COVID years they censored the world's best epidemiologists, or the European Digital Service Act, which is a censorship law.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So if I understand your question, is it about the media in the US or?
Well, the Digital Service Act of European Union.
Right.
European Union, I mean, the censorship in Harvard is a Harvard issue. And censorship of the world's best epidemiologists during the COVID years.
Right.
That's a US issue. US and world issue.
Even people like Altman say that you need to regulate the new media, that they cannot hurt children, they cannot hurt, people who run for office. There must be rules of the game in place, right? This is not going to be free for all. Now, in some discussions some years ago, we were thinking, which countries are less defenseless against authoritarian takeover? And we thought, US is pretty safe. Precisely because it has private media, very powerful private media, very powerful law firms, private law firms, very powerful private enterprises. And see what happened under Trump. Right? This all prove that even if you have powerful private companies, if the government is adamant to threaten them, they laid back and not do what they're supposed to do, right? So again, this is difficult issue. How you regulate the media, like social media, because of the content and so on, and then how you set up the relationship between the political power and the media, right? Okay, so maybe, please, right.
I wondered if you could speak to the role of the courts, the judicial system in our country. I mean, sadly, we've had quite an inconsistency between the U.S. Supreme Court and lower courts, but lower courts have certainly ultimately stood up to a lot of the most outrageous actions of the executive so far. We don't know what happens next, but as an institution and in terms of direction, would you like to speak to the role?
Well, you may want to think about democracy as a house standing on some, cornerstones, right? This is sort of analogy to ecology. In this situation, in ecological places, some species are more important than other species, right? So if you remove some, nothing may happen. But if you remove that important one, the whole system collapses, right? So in democracy, the judicial system and the media are the two most important components of the story. The moment you destroy that, everything is gone. So I think, the US has the advantage of having the tradition of very powerful, independent judiciary. Although, we have places where judges are elected in the US, which is a very interesting, comparative case. We can look at the places where judges are appointed and judges are elected and see, how this affects the judgments they give. But in comparison to Europe, I think, relatively US is in better position. Because the experiences of Hungary and Poland and other autocratizing countries are sort of very very worrying at this respect, right? So the state was very quickly able to take over the judicial system and put the judges in line and so on. In terms of media, it's pretty much the same situation. I think that still the US has the most powerful independent media, and it would be very, very difficult to destroy that, even if the big companies like CBS and others are kind of folding down and playing the game with the administration. There's plenty of others which could sort of carry the torch. This is a great question. Judiciary is at the heart of everything. The rule of law is in the heart of everything. And it's not very easy to build the rule of law or to maintain the rule of law. One of the clever British politicians said that in building the rule of law, the most difficult are the first 200 years. And that's the lesson for places like Hungary and Poland and some others which are trying to put in place the rule of law in the period of couple of decades. Thank you so much.